I'm going to have to start off this video with a little bit of an apology, because usually I'd be reading the script off of a separate screen from the one I'm recording on, but due to my living situation at the moment, that's not going to be possible. So I've got my script for this video written out, and I'm just going to be going through it because I'm not going to try and memorize all this. It's going to be extremely long. And as with all of my extremely long scripted things, I will just post a link to the script in the video so that you can just peruse it at your own pace rather than listening to me waffling on forever. I don't think I'll be adding too much to it as I go along, hopefully not. I think I've covered everything I want to say, so aside from this little introduction here, I think it will just be as written is what I'm going to be reading out. So with that out of the way, I think I'm just going to get started, and yeah, apologies for not having anything a little more interesting than just endless reams of text in front of you as I'm going through this video. So the Adeptus Custodes have been data mined as the next faction to release, and they look like they could well be a force to be reckoned with when it comes to guild raid damage output. So if you want to have a look at them for yourself, then you can head on over to the Warhammer 40k Tacticus subreddit and search for data mines under the names of Isof, Trajan, and I'm going to have trouble pronouncing this, but how am I going to pronounce this? Kariyan. It kind of sounds like dead meat. Kariyan. Alright, Kariyan. So I want to go over some of the maths here based on their stats as they're currently known to help any viewers come to a conclusion about whether they, for instance, might want to start pre-farming Custodes materials as I have done myself. I am aware that official content creators are unable to say anything about the Custodes release until they've been released due to contractual obligations, I suppose, and that the existence of this video may undermine their engagement that they get on their videos. What I'm about to say doesn't stem from any level of contempt or malice for these people, but simply my assessment of the facts. If you are, in a sense, to kiss Snowprint's ring, fanar, for official creator status, then that comes with the benefits of gaining notoriety through being able to give out codes in your name, having people directed to your videos from the in-game hobby hub without them needing to be subscribed to you on YouTube, and probably some other benefits that aren't coming to my mind right now. The trade-off they make, of course, is that they are unable to discuss certain things in public, and at present that is a Faustian bargain that I'm not particularly interested in taking. Everyone has a choice whether they want to make that bargain and accept the consequences, good and bad, and so I see discussion of leaked/data mined material as fair game on my part. One day I may be an official creator myself, and I won't begrudge people doing the same as I am doing now in that position. It's only fair. That will be my final word on this particular highly strung moral matter, so with that out the way, let's take a look at the centerpiece of the Custodes team, the Exeter row, if you will, and that is whatever I decided to call him, Kariyan. So Kariyan looks like an extremely interesting character, without doubt a damage-dealing powerhouse, and this stems from a multitude of factors, both in terms of his own general traits and his interplay with other characters. I'll go over these factors, starting with some of the more obvious ones. So first up, he has the Beast Slayer trait, giving him a bonus 20% damage against big targets. This is a universal damage boost against bosses, who are all big targets, and is part of the reason why Ragnar deals such potent damage in raids when war howling. It's also a multiplicative bonus, which I'll get onto later. Secondly, he has the Rapid Assault trait. Now, the bonus move and damage on this are certainly nice, but Kariyan deals consistently high damage that gradually ramps up over the course of a battle, diminishing the importance of the bonus damage from this trait compared to someone like, again, Ragnar, who front-loads most of his damage output into a single early turn in the battle. Where this trait really shines is in allowing him to be buffed by Dante's passive, an ability which gives impressive bonus damage to both normal attacks and attacks made via abilities in melee, both of which are relevant to Kariyan. Thirdly, his passive ability allows him to perform two different types of attack after his first attack, be that a normal attack or active ability use in a turn. If he is adjacent to a big target, something all bosses again are, the ability will deal a single 4,786 to 5,983 piercing damage to the target at level 50. Put simply, he'll be dealing a hugely damaging passive hit to the boss every time he attacks it, and this is key to his effectiveness. The fourth thing to mention are his interactions with Isof, another upcoming custodian. What Isof does via his passive ability is provide a 25% damage boost to non-normal attacks of adjacent friendlies at level 50, Oftentimes, when things give a certain bonus at level 50, they'll give that same amount of bonus at level 36. So you could hopefully possibly get away with only leveling this ability to level 36, which should cost just a single legendary badge plus all of the preceding lesser badges. But legendary badges are the real pinch point for this team, so that could be quite good. At any rate, this ability, it still boosts damage by 23% at level 35, so it actually ramps up in its boost quite slowly as it's leveled up, so you can get away with having this under-leveled. It's not huge priority to get this pumped really high, I don't think. So Kariyan's passive attack is not a normal attack, and so is affected by this ability. This looks like yet another multiplicative damage bonus, and I'm going to take a moment to explain what that means for those who may be unsure of the terminology or how the game works in terms of buffs. So in Tacticus, the general rule for damage buffs that add a percentage to damage output rather than a raw damage increase, such as that of Eldraon's Doom, is that they are multiplicative. In mathematical terms, what this means is that these cumulative buffs do not add together, but multiply on top of one another. To give an example, let's take Kariyan's passive hitting a boss, taking into account all the buffs I've discussed so far, which I'll just list again. So you've got Beast Slayer giving plus 20% damage, you've got Isoft's passive giving plus 25% damage, you've got Rapid Assault giving plus 25% damage, and I'll also throw in High Ground for an extra plus 50% damage. Now, if these bonuses were additive, you'd take the base damage of Kariyan's passive as being at 100% and then add them to it. This gives the total damage after all buffs of 100 plus 50 plus 25 plus 25 plus 20%, which rounds out to 220% bonus damage. Taking these bonuses as multiplicative, however, and you come to a much different final number. So you take 100%, you multiply it by 1.5, then by 1.25, then by 1.25 again, and then by 1.2, which gives you a final total of 281% bonus damage. So the multiplicative damage bonus ends up being a little over a quarter larger than the additive one. 27% larger, 61 percentage points, but yeah, around a quarter. And multiplying the base damage of Kariyan's passive, which deals around 5,400 damage on average without buffs, is certainly a big number, but we're not even close to done yet. And that brings me to the fifth item for discussion. Kariyan's damage scaling from his active ability. This ability at level 50, although again maybe as early as level 36, gives Kariyan's non-normal attacks from his passive for example, a 33% damage boost for every time he has performed an attack in battle. That could be either his normal attack or using his active ability. Guild Raid battles last 6 turns, and assuming that you're able to attack with Kariyan every single turn, this will sum up to a 200% multiplicative bonus to Kariyan's passive. Discounting the damage bonus from Rapid Assault as it will no longer be relevant in the final round, this now brings the damage of Kariyan's passive to 675% of its base value in the final round of the Guild Raid fight. So 6.75 times 5,400 damage is certainly impressive, but just you wait, I've been saving the best for last. Item number 6, Trajan's passive. At level 50, Trajan's passive causes an enemy that is adjacent to both him and a friendly character that uses an active ability to take an additional plus 1096, as well as 2 additional hits from the first non-normal attack that any character deals to the target. Both of these puzzle pieces are vital. The wording of the damage boost means it will function in the same way that Eldraon's passive ability, Doom, worked before it was nerfed, i.e. increasing damage taken from abilities as well as normal attacks. This includes Kariyan's passive. The additional hits are the really juicy part. The single hit from Kariyan's passive is already doing stupendous damage, and adding 2 additional hits with no damage cap to them will multiply its total damage output by 3. I'm going to consider a hypothetical situation to give a picture of how insane his damage output can get. Let me outline it. It's the final round of a boss battle. Kariyan has performed an attack every single turn, has high ground relative to the boss, and is being boosted by Isoft. Dante and Trajan to their he's being boosted by Isoft, Dante, and Trajan to their fullest capacity. I'm taking the average damage of his passive into consideration as its baseline damage and modifying it from there. I won't be considering crits, and I will be assuming that his target has 0 armor and cannot block him. With that established, let's get on with it. So his base damage of the passive is 5,384. The passive damage with buffs from both Trajan and Dante is equal to 5,384 plus 898 plus 1,096, which comes out to 7,378. Now we have to take into consideration all of the damage multiplying factors. So you've got Beast Slayer multiplying it by 1.2, Isoft's passive multiplying it by 1.25, High Ground multiplying it by 1.5, Kariyan's active multiplying it by 3, and then Trajan's passive also multiplying it by 3. The total multiplication of his damage that you come out to is 20.25 times multiplier. So the total damage is 7,378 times 20.25, which equals 149,400 damage. I think we can all agree that's quite an impressive number. So taking the maximum and minimum possible damage values of his passive, that gives a damage range of 137 to 162k damage. There are some caveats to this to consider. Firstly, and quite blatantly, the 200% bonus damage multiplier from Kariyan's active is great and all, but how much damage will he be doing over the rest of the battle as he's ramping up that boost? So okay, I'll have the same scenario for every turn as I just laid out, with the assumption that he begins attacking the boss in the second turn of the fight. So in the second turn, his damage multiplier is 11.2 times. In the third turn, it's 13.5 times. In the fourth, 15.7, and in the fifth, 18. Again, taking the average base damage of his passive and modifying it with the flat damage boosts available, it comes out to this. So in his second turn damage will be 83,000, third turn 100,000, fourth turn 116,000, and in the fifth turn 132,000. So over the course of all 6 turns, this gives a total damage output from Kariyan's passive alone, never mind his other attacks or those of the rest of the team, at an impressive 580,000. Before I move along from this as well, I'd also like to just take a moment to consider his active ability, which deals 3 times 2,992 to 3,589 damage. It is subject to Isoft and Dante's buffs, as well as Kariyan's own stacking buff, and so with all that in mind, and with the same assumptions as before, I conclude that it is able to deal, on average, 57k damage in the third round and 85k damage in the final round, for a total of 142k damage over the course of the battle. As its damage type is eviscerating, at least 50% of this damage is non-negotiable. All of this is still, of course, highly theoretical, and assuming the best in a lot of ways. There are a couple of assumptions that I really want to take a further look at. The assumption of the boss having no armor is obviously unrealistic. That being said, Kariyan's passive hit has 80% pierce ratio, so no matter what the armor stat of the boss is, it'll be doing a big, non-negotiable chunk of damage. The wording of Trajan's passive lends a bit of ambiguity to how the team works as well. To quote it, if the affected enemies are also adjacent to Trajan, friendly characters score 2 additional hits against them with their first attack that is not a normal attack. I'm unsure here as to whether Kariyan hitting the enemy with his active ability will count as his first non-normal attack, or if his active is needed for Trajan's passive to kick in, after which his passive attack will be the first non-normal attack of his to hit the enemy and be boosted. I've been assuming the best case scenario in terms of Kariyan's damage output, but I think this will need some testing to see just how it works. Because if his active ability is boosted by Trajan's passive rather than his passive, that will represent a significant decrease in the amount of damage he's doing in these turns. So another assumption that you may think I've taken a bit of liberty with is that Trajan's passive will be triggered every turn, and that's really vital to Kariyan's damage output. Now is a good time to bring up the fact that the active abilities of both Isoft and Kariyan are reusable, with a cooldown of 2 rounds. This means that you could use the active of Isoft in the second round and Kariyan in the third, or vice versa, although using Kariyan's later on is slightly better, and then do the same again in the 5th and 6th rounds. By the wording of Trajan's passive, I don't think that he can trigger it with the use of his own active ability, but this still leaves only the 4th round bereft of the means to trigger Trajan's passive outside of the core 3 Custodes. I imagine that Dante will also be a core character in this team, and he definitionally cannot use his active on the boss whilst being adjacent to it. He could trigger Trajan's passive if he was adjacent to the boss and targeted a boss add or summon, but this is very convoluted, and so I won't be considering it as viable. This leaves the additional needed trigger of Trajan's passive down to the 5th member of the team, and I'll be taking this into consideration when selecting possible characters to fill this role, which is what I'd now like to do. Right, apologies if there was an obvious cut in the video. I've been forced to relocate outside, so you may hear the objectionable sounds of birdsong and children laughing and having fun in the background, so I know you definitely don't want to hear that, so let's listen to the autistic droning on about pointless nonsense once again. I was just looking at the possible 5th team members for this hypothetical Custodes team. So to start off with, I'm going to be looking at Ragnar and Aun Shi. So it's quite in character for me to be confusing, and you might wonder how 2 characters constitute a 5th team member. In general, there's no denying the power of the Ragnar/Aun Shi combo, and I imagine a lot of people will have it built already as the core of the multi-hit team, so this could be fine as an interim means of filling out the team, with Dante being dropped. There is one instance I can think of, however, where this might be the optimal arrangement, a Magnus fight. This may be a moot point, as I can see the multi-hit team just being better against Magnus than the Custodes anyway, especially with the addition of the new Dark Angel, but the real big problem the Custodes have would be Kariyan attracting the gaze of Magnus onto himself the moment he begins attacking, and then not being able to shake it off. Against high-level versions of Magnus, this will probably be a quick death sentence for him. By double howling with Ragnar instead, he can deal a solid chunk of damage to the boss with Ragnar, which would hopefully keep the gaze locked on him for 1 or 2 rounds and enable Kariyan to stick out the whole of the fight, ramping up to his huge final damage numbers. A quick detriment to note is that using these characters leaves no means of triggering Trajan's passive outside of Kariyan and Isoth, so you will have 1 round where you won't be getting extra bonus hits on Kariyan's passive. Now another 5th character is Nicodemus. So Nicodemus will work in tandem with Dante to give a serious boost to Kariyan. Nicodemus can use his active to set Kariyan to 50% health, which means both his normal attacks and ability attacks will be granted an extra hit with uncapped damage by Dante's passive. Nicodemus, being a healer, also gives some tactical flexibility in fights where you may be tanking a lot of damage. On top of this, he has the Rapid Assault trait and thus gets his damage boosted by Dante's passive, though with just 3 hits on his normal attack this isn't too consequential on Nicodemus. Some downsides to consider with Nicodemus are that he will want to use his active early in the battle, and thus will not be able to trigger Trajan's passive buff when neither Isoth nor Kariyan are able to. Another downside is that if Kariyan is set to 50% health in the first turn, he may not be able to attack, as the heal from Nicodemus's active will bring him back above the 50% threshold. This will put a crimp on how much you are able to boost his damage output via Dante's passive ability, and there's a solid case for keeping Nicodemus's active ability at as low a level as possible, so that if Kariyan does attack after being set to half health, any further damage he takes will easily bring him below the 50% health level again, ready to be boosted by Dante. And I think this could actually be quite reliable because the enemy AI tends to prioritise targeting characters that are lower on health, so I think if Kariyan is the only one who's set to 50% health, because he's the only one who'll really benefit from Dante's buff in this team, that will attract heat onto him, so that'll hopefully undo the healing that Nicodemus's active ability provides if he does attack in the first turn. Now, of course, on some maps it is impossible to attack in the first round regardless of what happens, so this would not even be an issue there. Another thing to consider is just how difficult it may be to keep Kariyan at below 50% health without inadvertently getting him killed in certain boss fights. This may be a factor that makes this a team with a high skill ceiling, although his resilient trait might help keep him alive in certain sticky situations. Another member of the team I was thinking of was Khan. Khan is just a wonderful no-bullshit character that slots nicely into the team in that nearly all of his hits are able to be buffed by Dante and Trajan, and he provides a lot of hits. He's great for clearing ads, and he can use his active easily when the Custodes' actives are on cooldown to trigger Trajan's passive. His extra passive attack even gets a bonus 2 hits from Trajan, though this is not such a huge deal as their base damage is rather low, and they're not subjected to a huge bevy of damage multipliers as Kariyan's is. Still, if they're having their damage buffed by nearly plus 2,000 each, it's better than nothing. Helbrecht. Helbrecht is a staple choice against Psychers. His passive damage buff would boost Kariyan's passive, active and normal damage. His active ability is also easy to use on the turn when neither Isoth nor Kariyan can use theirs, and provides a useful boost. Unfortunately, I've already detailed why I think there's no space for him in the anti-Magnus team, and if you were to bring this team against Morty, I'd much rather have Nicodemus tagging along to provide kills. Replacing Dante with Helbrecht will likely be a superior option against Morty though, and of course there is always the potential for him to shine against future Psycho bosses that may be added to the game. Now the reason I think that Helbrecht especially would be a superior option to Dante is that if Dante is giving Kariyan an extra hit on his passive, that brings his hit total up to 4, which means that Morty's revoltingly resilient ability will slash the damage of that 4th hit in half. So that's not providing too much of a bonus, whereas Helbrecht's extra 1,500 damage per hit is bigger than Dante's bonus that he provides. So on the balance, I think Helbrecht could do better there. So another sort of a few options for a similar role are Asmodai, Roswitha and Zybia. So any one of these three can use their active ability to buff damage dealt against the boss by Kariyan and the rest of the team for 2 turns. Zybia and Roswitha can add another 1.2 times damage multiplier on top of the rest, whilst Asmodai gives a flat plus 997 damage boost to all affected hits. Of these, Zybia requires very little investment to reach her active ability's maximum potential, 1 legendary badge, and it can apply to any boss in addition to its potency. She is also not Imperial, which would make her my choice of buffer for the 5th slot in the team, just due to the squeeze on Imperial resources that is already present here. Now I just want to look at some general considerations of the team. So before I draw a line under this video, I just want to give some more general thoughts on the team. One big positive I can see for them is that there is no boss that really blocks them out. All of the characters that I can see being good on the team don't have a single boss in the game that bans them from being picked outright, such as Belisarius Cawl not allowing Admex to be used against him. On top of this, I don't see things like Gaz's damage reduction passive or Mortarian's revoltingly resilient passive hampering their damage output, as they are neither reliant on lots of attacks nor lots of hits to be able to deal heavy damage. Speaking of reliance, I can see only 3 abilities amongst the core characters that really need to be pushed to the max, those being Dante's passive, Trajan's passive and Kariyan's passive, and maybe Nicodemus's passive to a certain extent. The rest can either be leveled to 36 or completely ignored by the looks of things. Building this team outside of the possibilities of Aunshi and Khan and Zybia is almost entirely biased towards using Imperial resources, which is not exactly welcome, but the relatively few abilities that need pumping up for the team to function is at least a bit of a reprieve. In terms of meta viability, Kariyan's passive damage on its own is obviously impressive, as is the damage from his normal and active ability attacks, but I think the rest of the Custodes and Dante leave a little bit to be desired in their own output. Kariyan does a lot of work on his own, but he doesn't provide the brutal alpha strike something like a double-howled and Golgort/Helbrecht buffed Ragnar and Snotflogger can. Another advantage to a Ragnar double howl team is that you only really need high ground against the boss on the pivotal howl turn. For the rest of the battle it's nice to have, but not essential. Kariyan, on the other hand, does no monstrous burst of damage, but deals consistent, solid damage over the course of a fight. The practical upshot of this is that he may be quite limited compared to Ragnar against highly mobile bosses and/or ones without a lot of high ground available to attack them from. I can't say that I've run a great deal of numbers for the team really, aside from the jaw-dropping results you get for Kariyan's passive, but I think that in itself says a great deal regarding the possible meta viability of this team. I don't think they'll be blowing the mech team out of the water for fights against weaker trash bosses, but their strength will be in dealing dependable damage, even against high-level bosses with punishing armor stats thanks to Kariyan's 80% pierce on his passive attack, and generally awesome per-hit damage output. Bear in mind also that we've only seen how 3 of the Custodes function so far, and that further character releases may enhance their meta viability more than any pre-existing character. Given the history of Tacticus, I have some doubts about that, but we'll have to wait and see on that front. Anyway, having figured this out for myself, I at least wanted to sound the alarm for anyone who may not yet be aware of just how much these guys may be able to do, especially in terms of saving up resources for when they do finally release. There is also the big caveat that this information has been data mined and thus could be subject to change in the future, but that rarely seems to be the case. Nevertheless, it may be wise not to take this information as gospel just yet. And that's all I have for this, so I will shut up.